Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this this event, bright and early on the last day of what's been a long week for many of you, I'm sure. Welcome to our side event on growing sustainability, bridging food, biodiversity, and climate goals for a 1.5 degree future. My name is Kaveh Zahidi. I'm the director of the FAO Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment. It's my pleasure to moderate the event this morning. An event that's organized by FAO, CGIAR, WWF, on, as I mentioned, on, of course, the occasion of the 51st session of the Committee on World Food Security. I think after a week of deliberations here, you're very well aware of the discussions on agri-food systems and how the discussions on agri-food systems in this much broader context, including climate, biodiversity, is really expanding. The space is increasing, and I think it's a really a welcome discussion to be talking about agri-food systems in the context of climate, in the context of land, in the context of biodiversity. Because that's exactly where this conversation belongs. But of course, there's still a lot of obstacles when it comes to sort of the aspirations of the agri-food system transition that many countries have embarked on. And not just embarked on, but in a way embedded into their various planning instruments, whether it's the National Adaptation Plans, the NAPs, or the nationally determined contributions that flow out of the UNFSS process, whether it's the national biodiversity strategies and action plans that flow out of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the famous NBSAPs, the Land Degradation Neutrality Targets, so multiple sort of planning instruments raining down on countries where, of course, food and the food system transition is a very, very important part, and many countries have already embedded or mainstreamed that transition into the sectoral aspirations in climate, in biodiversity, in land degradation, and beyond. In addition, we're all aware of the CFS voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. These guidelines aimed at promoting policy coherence and reducing, to some degree, policy fragmentation between sectors that impact food systems and nutrition, whether it's health, whether it's agriculture, education, environment, gender, social protection, trade, you name it. So during today's event, I think what we're going to do is twofold. First, we're going to try to unpack how countries are using the guidelines on food systems and nutrition and linking all of these multiple national policies that are addressing the Rio Conventions across climate, biodiversity, and land. And then we're going to specifically do a little deep dive into the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that was adopted at COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, as well as have a look at the UNFSS process, the COP27 presidency of Egypt and the COP28 presidency of UAE that will be represented here, that have also really, I think, elevated the role and certainly the discussions on agri-food systems and put them center of both the biodiversity and indeed the climate agendas, looking at the co-benefits, the multiple benefits that are to be gained from agri-food system solutions. Before we begin, before all of that, I think we're gonna begin with country examples no, sorry. So I think that's the order of play. But to sort of set the scene for us, to do the sort of the framing of our conversation for today, we're very lucky to have Juan Lucas Restrepo, who is the Global Director of Partnerships and Advocacy at CGIAR and Director General of the Alliance of Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. Juan Lucas, we invite you to deliver your opening remarks and really frame our conversation for this morning. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Kaveh, and good morning to all. It's great to be here and to see the interest and attendance to this session on the last day of CFS on a Friday morning that's kind of rainy. So thanks for being here. This shows a lot of interest in this discussion about the bridging of the food biodiversity and climate conversations and efforts. So just to help with a bit of the framing, we have heard the numbers, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to go in details, but hunger is still rising. If we look at 2019 versus the last report, we are seeing about 120, 200, a bit more million people going hungry every day, and a food system that's failing, that's not responding, that's very fragile, and of course science is signaling that we need to harness both adaptation and mitigation in agriculture, in food systems, to meet the Paris Agreement, the GBF, and the Zero Hunger goals. And we have this catch-22 kind of a problem where food and agriculture are important contributors to the climate crisis, accounting for about a third of the global greenhouse emissions, and also being an important driver of environmental degradation, while at the same time, food and agriculture are impacted, are negatively affected by climate change and nature loss, which undermines our efforts to end hunger and achieve food security and nutrition. So because the food, climate, and biodiversity challenges are interconnected, the solutions need to become more and more multi-sectoral, and not only multi-sectoral, but clearly tailored to local context, because the severity and extent to which these challenges are affecting different geographical areas varies enormously. So this is why we need to work hand in hand with national research systems, the private sector, and most importantly, end users, farmers, to co-create locally adapted solutions that take into consideration the context and specificities of each country and region. Also, and Cabe mentioned this clearly, the policy and the decision-making processes at different levels need to be better coordinated to ensure meeting the related global targets. So collective, democratic, inclusive approaches to discussions on food, climate, and biodiversity at the global level are critical to achieve food security and nutrition, climate resilience, and biodiversity conservation. So as the main multi-stakeholder UN platform addressing these issues, CFS can help and is helping to overcome silos, providing space for inclusive cross-sectoral dialogue to address the integration of food, biodiversity, and climate actions. The CFS policy work is also crucial to guide countries' action on the ground to achieve this integration. And as also Cabe mentioned, the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, which aims to promote policy coherence and reduce policy fragmentation between sectors that impact food systems and nutrition. So today, our speakers will discuss, we'll discuss how the implementation of these voluntary guidelines is happening on the ground, and how the recommendations can be used to bridge and divide the divide between food security and climate change agendas. We'll also hear from the COP28 presidency on their vision on food systems, and the UAE presidency as making an important and exemplary effort to make sure that we talk about food and biodiversity in a space that is normally, or has been normally, dominated by discussions around transport and energy. So these are, of course, important, but food needs to be part of the equation. And this is a huge milestone and a clear sign of how the perception of food systems is shifting from being the cause to being part of the solution to addressing climate change. So thanks again to the organizers for putting together such a diverse and great panel, and I look forward to listening to our speakers' intervention and audience comments. Back to you, Kaveh.
Juan Carlos, thank you so much. I think that's the perfect way to start the conversation. I mean, you reminded us that we are beyond the sectoral approach. We have to be looking at solutions that are interconnected and multi-sectoral, and the CFS has begun that journey, and so have maybe some of the conventions, right? Biological diversity with the Global Biodiversity Framework, certainly UNFSS that is moving in that same direction. And all of this is helpful to, I think you said, shift the perception that actually agri-food systems have a lot of solutions to offer. Solutions for adaptation, solutions for building resilience, solutions for mitigation, for sustainable use of biodiversity, and of course, for food security and nutrition. So thank you very much for those framing remarks. Now it is my total honor, my absolute pleasure, as always, to introduce the next speaker, who is Her Excellency Carla Barroso Carneiro, who is the permanent representative of Brazil to FAO, and an ever-present and an amazing dynamo, I would say, of work within FAO, including on joining the dots, joining all of these what seem to have been at sometimes disparate processes together. Ambassador, I've been given two questions. I guess one is around the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, as well as UNFSS and UNCBD. I guess what I said, we have so many things sort of raining down on countries in terms of guidelines and planning instruments. How are you managing to integrate all of this? How are you managing to pull all of the strands together in the context of Brazil? And the second question was whether you can share some specific examples of initiatives, whether at the farm or at the subnational, national levels, that demonstrate the sort of the efforts in Brazil to promote this more multi-sectoral collaboration within the obviously agri-food systems, but aligning with climate, biodiversity, and other aspirations that the country has. Ambassador, over to you.
No, thank you so very much. Good morning. Well, Kaveh, I will have to confess, I had never been called dynamo before. I will try to live up to your expectations. Thank you so very much for giving us the opportunity of being here and showing how Brazil is trying to move beyond the sectoral approach, as you said. We in Brazil consider that the Cannes-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that came out of COP15 of CDB shows us that much can be accomplished considering food security, climate, biodiversity nexus. The Global Biodiversity Framework places emphasis in agri-food systems, duly balancing conservation, sustainable use, and fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Brazil's initiatives regarding food security and nutrition include the relationship between the combined crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and unfortunately, high rates of hunger and poverty. We firmly believe that sustainable development does not exist in the absence of balance between its environmental, social, and economic pillars. And that is why we put so much emphasis on the nexus that has been built in the Global Biodiversity Framework. Therefore, food security and nutrition must be promoted in alignment with respect for the environment, strengthening social protection, and most of all, overcoming poverty. For Brazil, and this has been our mantra for those that have been here for the last months, bioeconomy is one of the paths to achieve several targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, such as the decarbonization of the economic model, the promotion of biodiversity preservation, the restoration of ecosystems, and the development and sustainability of local communities. In Brazil, and that has been a first in our countries, and I suppose that in many other countries it would have been a first. Our ministries of finance, agriculture, and environment are working together in a program for the ecological transformation of our economy. And bioeconomy is one of its components based on the intrinsic relationship between biodiversity, ecosystems, and people, notably indigenous peoples and local communities. In August, just some months ago, we held in Pará, in Belém do Pará, a city in the middle of the Amazon, the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization Summit. There we had representatives of the countries of the Amazon Treaty that signed the Belém Declaration. Paragraphs 73 to 83 of the declaration lay out a agenda that we consider a strategic agenda for the development of value chains based on the sustainable use of the Amazon biodiversity, which uses science, innovation, technology, and traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, aiming at a new economic model with social inclusivity at its core. Moreover, Brazil pledged to hold COP30 of the UNFSS in the Brazilian heart of the Amazon rainforest. And we plan to use that occasion to tell people the value of the forest in itself. The forest is not something that we have to overcome. It is in itself an ecosystem that we must preserve, taking into account the needs of inclusivity. You had two questions for me. Do you really want me to answer both questions? Do we still have any time?
Well, yeah, sorry, I think so. I think it was really about just understanding the Brazilian experience in doing it. I mean, I had here even at the farm level, I don't know whether you can go that detailed in a continent as big as Brazil, but please.
Yes, we can. We're eager to do that. But I hesitate because, as Mr. Restrepo said, any solution has to be regional, has to be adapted to circumstances. So what we can here is try and bring our context, our situation, the solutions that we have been building, but we do not want to sound prescriptive. So anyway, I will go on and tell you a little bit more about Brazil and what we have been achieving, but with an aim to inspire, but not to be prescriptive. So in Brazil, we like to boast that 50% of the national energy supply comes from renewable resources. In Brazil, food systems contribute to the production of biomass and biofuels. Energy production from agricultural inputs and animal waste, in addition to being clean and stable, helps strengthen agricultural production and distribution chains and reduces electricity prices, which is something that is crucial if we are entering the winter here in Europe. This activity takes into account the so-called second harvest, because in tropical countries, you're able to have 2 or even 3 harvests per year, generates co-products for animal feed, and does not threaten food production. That is this dilemma that we used to hear about in the last 10 years about using land for energy or for food production does not exist, in fact, because in tropical areas, we can have 2 to 3 harvests per year. Based on the Brazilian experience, biomass and biofuels obtained from agricultural production and waste resulting from the process contribute to diversifying renewable energy sources, reducing rural poverty and food insecurity while promoting health and well-being. And that amounts to at least 5 of the SDGs in itself. Additionally, they create jobs and income throughout the food system, allowing for regional resilience and local development. And then we aim up to other 4 SDGs. So this is how important this initiative is. In addition to energy production, Brazilian agri-food systems are well positioned to provide solutions compatible with the fight against climate change. Those solutions can involve the enforcement of legislation, the fostering of sustainable agricultural activities, the articulation of interministerial action with the participation of civil society, and a strong focus on social inclusion. But as I just said, we do believe the name of the game is cooperation. There is no one solution fits all. So we are eager and available if there is any need for us to exchanging best practices that we have been building through the last decades. But we do also believe that each country should build their own solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Carla. I think it was really helpful because, it's beyond the theoretical, it's happening in practice. And as you say, so many of these solutions, they bring multiple benefits. There is still maybe a misunderstanding, this sort of false dichotomy between production and environment, or between development and environment. And in reality, it doesn't exist. Actually, there are many solutions that bring multiple benefits. And some of those, you mentioned approaches like the bioeconomy one, are really about an integrated solution framework that deals with the economy, environment, climate, biodiversity, and people, most important of all. So thank you for that. I think it's a perfect segue actually to the next speaker, Professor Anne-Marie Tao, the Associate Professor in Public Policy and Health at University of Sydney. And you have your sign now, apologies, that took a little bit longer. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. You've done a study on assessing how countries are implementing the CFS voluntary guidelines that were mentioned at the beginning of our session, the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. So we're very interested to hear how it's gone from practice to implementation. Professor Anne, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to join this side event. As my colleagues have touched on, more than 500 million people go to bed hungry every night. 1 in 10 adults are living with diabetes. A third of greenhouse gas emissions are produced by food systems, and 78% of the world's poorest people live in rural areas and work in our food systems. We clearly have food systems at the moment not delivering on these critical outcomes. And again, to echo my fellow panelists, achieving sustainable food systems and improved nutrition is a global priority. One of the critical challenges is balancing multiple objectives of food systems and managing the trade-offs. Food systems are pivotal to livelihoods, economies, nutrition, and environmental sustainability. And what we see, and what I think this panel is oriented to addressing, is that often impacts on nutrition and environment are neglected in pursuit of other goals. And there's an opportunity for innovation to address this imbalance. And in this intervention, I'm going to briefly introduce and speak to the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition and their implementation. The voluntary guidelines present a comprehensive, systemic, and science-based approach to achieving healthy diets through sustainable food systems by addressing policy fragmentation. They have a special emphasis on the food, agriculture, and nutrition sectors, but they also address economic, social, and environmental sustainability issues. The voluntary guidelines do not provide a one-size-fits-all approach to food systems and nutrition. Rather, they outline key priorities for food systems transformation and serve as a reference point for identifying specific actions at national level that can create change. And I want to echo my fellow panelists' point about the importance of not being prescriptive, but in fact, leveraging unique solutions that are appropriate to country context. Having said that, though, I think there's a huge opportunity to learn from the innovation and the adaptation of these global best practice recommendations that's happening globally to move forward this agenda. Implementation of the voluntary guidelines occurs on 3 planes. It addresses governance, policy intervention, and partner action. And I want to give you 2 really specific examples from the voluntary guidelines that illustrate these different dynamics of implementation. First, at the governance level. The voluntary guideline 3.1.1 states that governments should foster policy coordination and coherence across sectors and agencies to reduce all forms of malnutrition from a food systems perspective. These sectors and agencies may include those impacting on health, agriculture, environment, water, sanitation, gender equality, social protection, trade, employment, and finance. And what we see here is this multi-sectoral engagement. And in practice, in terms of implementation, this entails multi-sectoral platforms that bring together stakeholders from not only across sectors, but from across different agencies. And this is something that occurs globally. As an example, the National Development Planning Commission in Ghana has established a multi-stakeholder platform for nutrition that includes these key food system sectors and actors. Committees like this play a key coordination role. The second illustration I wanted to give reflects the policy intervention and multi-stakeholder engagement that's called for in the voluntary guidelines. Guideline 3.2.1 states that governments, development partners, civil society and non-governmental organisations and private sector should collaborate with food producers and their organisations for them to achieve decent livelihoods and to enhance the resilience of food supply chains to climate change impacts by managing risk, building preparedness and resilience, and by mitigating food supply chains' negative impacts on the environment. This can include building on local knowledge and innovation, increasing access to finance, extension services, insurance, weather forecasting, early warning systems, capacity development, etc. And this really, I think, echoes many of the comments made previously. And in terms of implementation, you can see the interaction between the multi-stakeholder platforms in enabling the operationalization of this type of comprehensive intervention. As an example, I've been working with colleagues recently in Solomon Islands in the Pacific, and their engagement between agriculture, environment, and health sectors in particular, with engagement of the private sector, has led to identification of new approaches to both policy and to building capacity among field staff across multiple sectors to improve food system outcomes. I want to emphasize that implementation of these comprehensive voluntary guidelines requires adaptation and innovation to integrate best practice food system policies into the existing local context. Implementation must be both multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder, engaging the private sector, NGOs, and academia. It must also identify and manage potential conflicts of interests. There's a really critical role for government leadership in creating platforms where this implementation can happen. I want to emphasize as I close that it's absolutely critical at this juncture that we're able to also institute monitoring and evaluation that enables us to learn not only from the outcomes, but also from processes through which implementation and operationalization of these multi-sectoral initiatives happen. The managing of trade-offs that I mentioned before, balancing multiple and sometimes competing objectives, create challenges in turning these aspirations into reality. And I think monitoring and evaluation that pays attention to those processes through which effective engagement across different sectors occurs is absolutely critical. Thank you so much.
Professor Anne-Marie, thank you very much for that. I think it's incredibly interesting to hear, and I think that the experience sort of, you've taken it from the angle of nutrition and these guidelines, but you have a sort of similar experience now in biodiversity and climate, and some of the the means that you mentioned for success, whether it's the multi-stakeholder platforms, sort of the comprehensive intersectoral approach that these guidelines have prompted, are actually of use in the other processes as well. You know, it is ultimately the solutions that will tie together all of these planning processes. So thank you very much for that context. So we go from nutrition to biodiversity and then climate change. On the biodiversity side, we all celebrated COP15 and the outcomes of the COP in terms of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, a framework that, as Ambassador Carla said, fully recognizes the sustainable use of biodiversity as an important element of achieving our aims when it comes to biodiversity. So Julie, my colleague Julie Bélanger, who's an expert in this and in the process and lived the process and now the implementation of that very process, is going to give us a little bit of an insight into how all of these agendas intersect, in this case, through the window of the GBF and biodiversity. Julie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning and to discuss a bit more the biodiversity side of the nexus, food, biodiversity, and climate. So as Mr. Zahedi mentioned, last year the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted at the 15th Conference of the Parties of the CBD. And this framework calls for transformative action across sectors. So this framework replaces the Aichi targets that have expired in 2020. And what is new with this framework? There are several things. One is that the targets are more ambitious. For example, instead of 17% of conservation, now we are talking about 30% of conservation. The framework better recognizes the role of the whole of society and of indigenous communities and indigenous people in particular. And agriculture plays a much more proeminent role in this new Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So there are more than half of the targets that have a close link with agri-food sectors, fisheries, forestry, crop livestock production. And these targets contain real tasks and challenges for countries, for the global communities, and for agriculture sectors from now until 2030. For example, with Target 2, there is a commitment to to ensure that 30% of degraded areas, including degraded agroecosystems, are under effective restoration. Or with Target 7, there's an aim to reduce by half nutrient loss and the pesticide risks. Then Target 10 foresees that areas under agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and aquaculture are managed sustainably with a significant increase in biodiversity-friendly practices. So these have implication for agri-food sector, for countries, for the work of FAO. It's clear that agri-food systems have a central role to play in the implementation of the framework, that agriculture stakeholders need to engage in these efforts. And also, it's important to remember that a lot of technical and policy solutions exist already that should be used and implemented. So with the increasing demands on agriculture sectors from these commitments on biodiversity, but also the climate commitments, and also food insecurity, the SDG commitments, SDG 2 in particular, there's, as was mentioned before, an urgent need to upscale solutions that work to improve food security, that work to sustainably use, conserve, and restore biodiversity, and address climate change. So there are several solutions that exist with, for example, if we refer to the report of the Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and the IPBES, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, There is a review of the different solutions that exist there for climate adaptation, mitigation, and for biodiversity loss. And several options are assessed. For example, increasing soil organic carbon content, for example, through increasing soil biodiversity, restoring degraded land, can have a huge mitigation potential, benefit also billions of people in terms of quality of life and also food security. But one thing that has been mentioned before and is really important to also keep in mind is to recognize that there is a huge diversity of contexts, of agri-food production systems, of local solutions that exist, and a lot more work is needed there to support countries in their efforts. So going back to the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, with the adoption of the framework, countries now have to update and revise their national biodiversity strategies and action plan to reflect these commitments that have been taken. And so there are several entry points for agri-food solutions in guidance to update those NBSAPs, but also to support the implementation and to contribute to monitoring and reporting of the impact of the actions that would be taken. So in FAO, we have the strategy to mainstream biodiversity across agriculture sector that guides our work in FAO on biodiversity, including the support we provide to countries in their NBSAP and other initiatives. And if I may just mention very quickly, there are many initiatives and projects in FAO that targets biodiversity, genetic resources, climate change, etc. But I would like to mention one small pilot project, but that is very relevant to this discussion. We are supporting the alignment of agriculture policies with NBSAP, National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plan, and climate commitments in 3 countries currently, as a first step in Laos, Uganda, and Madagascar. This contributes directly to targets 8, 10, and 14 of the framework. And so we work closely with the agriculture and environment ministries and with close multi-stakeholder consultations. And as part of this work, methodology is being developed and tested for eventual scaling out to further countries. So in conclusion, as part of this work, upcoming resources that may be useful in supporting countries' effort is these methodological guides that I just mentioned to align agriculture policies with Rio conventions. The OCB unit is also, OCB office is working on different packages on the nexus, climate, biodiversity, and environment, including on awareness raising, capacity building. And we are also developing FAO Biodiversity Knowledge Hub where we have compiled all the resources that are available in FAO and match them to the different targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework to improve access and awareness of these tools. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. That's very helpful, and it's great that we're talking about some very practical, some examples of what can be done. You mentioned restoring degraded land. I mean, 1/3 of agricultural land is degraded. Imagine the power of restoring that in terms of mitigation, in terms of building resilience, in terms of food security and nutrition. So these solutions are there, but I guess we're not yet seeing the financing flowing into them in a way that can help to scale them up, to meet in a way their potential. For meeting all of these goals across climate, biodiversity, and food. And thank you also for mentioning the Nexus initiative. We have decades of experience working individually with countries on doing their climate planning. In this case, right now, it's NDCs and NAPs. In doing their biodiversity planning, now it's the NBSAPs. In doing, to some degree, their food systems planning. And in essence, what we've learned is when you look at it from an agri-food system perspective, you're more or less, it's the same things that you need to embed in each of these plans. It's more or less the same actions, it's more or less the same investments in some of the solutions, like the restoration of degraded land or agroforestry, or whatever it might be. And now we've pulled all of that together in a really, I think, a powerful Nexus initiative that is building on the success of COP15 and the GBF, and of course of COP27 and the repositioning, I would say, of agriculture and food systems, and COP28, right, on climate, which I think has elevated now agriculture and food systems to a level that hasn't been seen before. We have in the negotiation process itself, obviously a very important piece of the official process, the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on agriculture and food security. It's you know, the continuation of the Coronivia. It really embeds this discussion in the official process, and it's super important. But the presidency has now elevated it even further, and I think looking even more from a systematic point of view to ensuring that food systems and the solutions that many of the panelists spoke about are also front and center when talking about climate change and climate COP. And that's I think my way of saying thank you to the next panelist, Imelda Bakudo, or Dada, a senior specialist of food systems of the COP28 presidency. A few very busy weeks ahead of you, 30-something days to COP. Dada, how do we bring all of these different elements together?
Yes, thank you very much, Kaveh, and good morning to everyone. And it's a pleasure for us to share with you the COP28's presidential program on food system. Now, I wanted to say that at the heart of COP28 will, of course, be the negotiation process, right? But the presidential presidency of UAE has deemed it such an opportunity to aim for higher ambitions. And the food system program is under its program, which really clearly brings together all the elements we're talking about. It's under its program of nature, people, and livelihoods. And that's where we will find the food system program of the presidency. Many of you has probably heard our program in so many meetings that we've been bringing it all over. It has 4 pillars. One is on state action. And this state action, at the heart of this state action, is what it's called the Emirati Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Food System, and Climate Action. We went through so many iterations of this name. And I think the changes that we have undergone for this name really also speaks about some of the gaps and some of the things that experts here in this room can help the presidency implement this Emirati Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Food System, and Climate. I mentioned, for example, that there's a gap. We know that agriculture should inevitably be understood as within the food system framework. But we know that where we find agriculture within the convention, or when I say the convention, UNFSS, is really under Coronivia and the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work on agriculture. But for some parties, there is resistance to the term food system or an integrated approach. So we are not playing tone deaf to this reality that we are facing. And so we believe that this term is also more integrative of what's the reality that we are facing on the field. Because of this and in order to implement it, there are so many elements that the presidency has sought support. We do not wish to create new initiatives, but actually build on what's already out there. There is, for example, the creation of a task force of which Faust Scala was in there, in helping us come up with guiding principles on how to implement the integration of all these elements of food system into climate policy frameworks. So it's going to come out with principles of integrating NDCs and NAPs, integrating agriculture and food system into these climate policy frameworks. We've actually included NBSAPs into this task force, but there seems to be some resistance saying this is not mandatory yet. So you could see how we still have many gaps to play in all of these. Also, for the Heads of State Leaders Declaration or Emirati Declaration, it's going to be signed by heads of state. In one of the texts, there's we put provision for according to the principles of the 3 Rio Convention. And we get comments from parties that says, where's the Biodiversity Convention? So we're trying to save on words by just saying Rio Convention, it's there. But fortunately, the Kunming-Montreal Declaration found its way and is approved within this declaration, which we are working now to get as many signatures as we can. And I really think that we're gonna get a lot of signatures in here. And so we also have programs for non-state actors in which we're looking at really the primary role of food producers into contributing towards biodiversity for sustainable food production. And so we rely on existing initiatives that are out there, one of which, for example, is FAST, which was Food Agriculture Sustainable Transformation, launched by the Egyptian presidency. This is a nod of the UAE presidency to what was really started by the Egyptian presidency on highlighting food in climate discussions and in climate summits. As well as there's also, we're looking at initiatives that you have all mentioned here. There's going to be space for nutrition in the presidency under this food system program. We're looking at this compensation for farmers because we're really elevating the role of farmers in giving us ecosystem services. There's going to be an innovation pillar that opens up a new platform that supports existing platforms on innovations such as Aim4C and the CGIAR group. And lastly, we're looking at launching a finance vehicle to support all of these innovation and initiatives that we are looking at. But at the heart of it is really, I think the main challenge that the presidency is facing is really putting all of this together without, at the same time, accompanying, if I may say, the slowness of the negotiated formal items, but that these two come hand in hand. But at the same time, it's the opportunity of the presidency to aim for higher ambitions. So it's there and we're using that opportunity. Lastly, Kaveh, I just want to share that perhaps everyone is curious what's going to happen within the 12 or 14 days of COP. We're going to open with the World Action Climate Summit. First 2 days of very high-level discussions, giving nod to all the new declarations that come out of COP28. And then each day is going to be dedicated to certain themes. Nature is, of course, there. We're inserting several, there's finance and there's energy day. And it's all divided. And the last day of COP will be the Food and Water Day. We're opening COP at a high level with our leaders' declaration, the Emirati leaders' declaration. We're also ending COP with food as the theme. So we're hoping to see you in Dubai in 4 or 5 weeks' time from now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dada. Thank you very much for sort of bringing. We know it's very few days left to COP, but it's so nice to see that the COP presidency speaking about the issues of food, nutrition, biodiversity. I think it's immense progress. As Dada said, it's not all there yet. There are certain resistance. So we see a real change from let's say the top down, the global conventions, the Kunming, the GBF was definitely a step in the right direction. Certainly the UNFSS with the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work, the Coronivia before it, and now the lift that the presidency is giving is a step in the right direction. The implementation of the guidelines and the real broadening of the nutrition conversation is a part of it. But ultimately the proof is in the pudding, right? It's in those examples that you mentioned. It's in the application. It's in convincing countries and investors to finance these solutions that help to address biodiversity and food security and climate change, adaptation and mitigation. And I guess that's our collective challenge. I'd like to just recognize that we do have people online who've been kind enough to join and to listen, and some of them have sent in questions. I'm not sure if we have a lot of time for questions. Certainly there was a question to you, Professor Anne-Marie, about just wanting to know a little bit more about the Solomon Islands. How does this intersection really work between food, environment, health in the context of, I guess, Solomon Islands? You mentioned Ghana as well, but I guess that the colleagues online are just interested to see how it really works in practice. Maybe just a word or two in the minute or two we have left.
Thank you so much. I'd be delighted, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Seno Mowley, who's led that work and the engagement. And one specific example that I can give is some work that she did as a researcher, but connected into Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, looking at building capacity across multiple dimensions in field staff, because one of the challenges we see is high-level engagement often having trouble getting translated down to the actual implementation at community level. And so she did a series of interviews with the implementation level staff to understand how they could build capacity to take action on food systems, but also build capacity to be able to engage across sectors at field community level. So she's also published that if you're interested to read more.
Definitely, thank you. And I'm sorry to rush you. I was mistaken. We have 15 minutes, which is perfect. So now we've gained time. I'm so used to panels where you rush everybody at the end and say thank you very much. We'd love to hear from you. But now we really would love to hear from you. If there's any specific questions or observations, and if you want to introduce yourself and let us know what's on your mind, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cave. I'm Lara. I work here at the Delegation of Brazil. And I have a question for Julie of FAO. I cover CFS here in Rome. And what I've noticed is that one of the issues, the challenges that we face at CFS is the implementation of the products that we produce there. And I wanted to hear from Julie, because we've heard from Anne and a little bit from also Dr. Restrepo, how they are implementing the policy products that we produce at CFS. So I wanted to hear what FAO is doing with regards to using the various products that we have produced at CFS to this nexus, specifically with this nexus of food, biodiversity, and climate. And besides the strategy, the FAO strategy, how could you connect the FAO strategy with the various CFS products? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. You are raising a very important point, a very challenging point. There is, in effect, in CFS, but also in FAO, in the Commission on Genetic Resource, the technical committees, the governing bodies, a range of tools that are instruments that are agreed upon, and sometimes they are not implemented in the ambition that was following the ambition that countries had when negotiating them. Efforts are done at the more, let's say, with technical divisions, at project implementation, to try to use as much as possible the existing instruments to follow, for example, the standards that are approved, some of them under CFS. I'm not very familiar with the product of the CFS, I have to admit, but standards or voluntary guidelines, including those on the CFS, on land tenure, etc. So these principles, standard guidelines are used to inform the development of project, of technical assistance that is provided to countries or in various projects. and how, so the strategy is, in fact, you mentioned the FAO strategy on biodiversity. It also aims to put at the forefront these tools, instruments that are developed and negotiated in the different forums of FAO, and to increase their application on the ground. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I would be happy to continue this discussion with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. No, I think it's a good question, and it's a hard question, because all of these processes have their own mechanisms and planning and tools and guidelines, and then we've sort of got to use the same process and all other processes to implement those very same guidelines and tools and instruments. So there's a real sort of cross-fertilization that's needed. And I know that we launched, there was an FAO report on nutrition and climate that came out a day or two ago. Maybe the biodiversity element wasn't strong enough, but this is our big challenge. We're not going to be able to merge these processes, but somehow in the implementation, they have to come together, whether it's through the multi-stakeholder partnerships, whether it's through the specific solution domains that have been identified. Any other Yes, yes. Juan Lucas, over to you first.
Yeah, just to complement a little bit, and we've been discussing about solutions, and we've been talking about the importance of local context and adaptation to local context, and then we have this big gap between what we all agree at the global level and what happens on the ground at the level of the communities, basically. So just to mention a few things. The first is that there is significant, we need more, but there is significant funding in terms of green finance, but only 0.7% is reaching the small farmers, small communities. So that means that the problem at the moment may be more, yes, we need more funding, but the demand is not being able to be organized in such a way to capture those funds for transformation and to bring the solutions on the ground. And this is, so there is not, from a financial sector, there are not enough bankable projects. And there are not enough bankable projects because of a number of reasons, but mainly, it's my view, because we are going usually for, we keep insisting on silver bullets, single solutions that are productivity-based or biodiversity-based, etc. But we're not that good at bundling solutions. And there are recent experiences, and in CGIAR, we've been working with the World Bank on a process to accelerate climate adaptation in agriculture in Africa, where the effort is precisely on supporting at the sub-regional, national, and subnational levels the bundling. What solutions are there that are locally based, that come from the local traditional knowledge, but new knowledge, etc., and how can you bring them together so you go for something that's a bit more complex, but as you integrate solutions in those local ecosystems, then the possibility to fund and finance change and to ensure communities are empowered and local governments are incentivized is much higher. So just a signal that if we do not make a greater effort in integrating those solutions, in bundling those solutions, it's going to be very difficult, very hard to see change on the ground. And maybe last thing, listening to the Brazilian experience, for example, we still see knowledge and new technologies, etc., flowing north to south. And there is a huge opportunity on greater south-south triangular collaboration. So if you look at what's happening in Brazil, in India, in China, there is this very large, powerful innovation systems that are coming on with solutions, but are not connecting well enough with what's happening in Africa, with solutions in those analog spaces. So we are running a lot of that. South-South cooperation in order to bridge these gaps and be better at the solution space.
Very nice points. Can I take a question and then I come back to you? For one question and one panelist? Yes, go ahead, and then we come straight back.
Good morning. Thank you very much for all the good comments. My name is Lina. I'm from WHO. And my question is to the presidency, Ms. Makudo. For the first time, there will also be a health day at COP28. I'm from the nutrition department, and for nutrition, you need both health and you need food systems and food. And so the food day is at the end and the health day is at the beginning. And I'm wondering, like, how can we make sure that these two sectors or narratives can be brought together? Because health ministers are invited. They will come the first days, and then the food ministers, agriculture ministers will come at the end. And they need to be there together and talk to each other, because what we want is healthy and sustainable and diverse diets. And that needs to be said in both, throughout the COP, in fact. So how can the COP presidency help in bringing those sectors together?
Welcome to our lives of managing all the schedules. Well, I think that there's so much improvement or so much progress going on for COP28 in really merging climate and health. As of yesterday, Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, the UAE presidency of COP, has written an article on The Guardian that just came out emphasizing the impacts of climate change on health issues. So it's what you're asking is merely a matter of logistics, because this is how it's going to happen. Some ministers are coming at the beginning, some ministers are coming at the end. I tell you, every day we wake up to many different ways on how we're going to make them all meet together. But the promising part here is the Ministries of Agriculture. There's a high-level segment on food. We will open up the COP as well for 45 minutes, but there's also at the end, you are right, and in the middle is Health Day. Hopefully everybody will all meet. That is our part, but the schedule is really beyond us. But the messaging, the programs, the initiatives that we are all putting together, I've never witnessed a COP, as having attended so many other COPs, that has done so much consultative work with so many stakeholders all over. And so I think that at some point there is a merging. If it's just in terms of the meeting, but initiatives, trying to, just the declaration that I shared earlier, there's really a nod to nutrition, to health, to trade, to biodiversity, to every aspect of food system that we are allowed to put in there. Some of the controversies, for example, on lowering greenhouse gas emissions, Brazil is very much a challenge there. And and these have all to be included in one high-level leaders declaration, and that's why we are aiming for heads of states to sign this, so that there's really a merging of all these silos together under heads of states.
Thank you, Dada. Of course, there's multiple agendas all coming together, but there are also some initiatives that sort of tie these COPs together. You mentioned the FAST initiative and some of the other ones. ICANN, that's another one, where you can sort of engineer this coming together, right, of the right people. We certainly have events planned which bring together ag ministers, those responsible for biodiversity, and of course climate. So I think there are initiatives that we might be able to use as a platform. Brazil looms large in our minds. You wanted to maybe add a few words, Master Carla.
Yes, just some brief comments. I don't want to take the opportunity from other people to kind of make their own questions and comments. One thing that I wanted to mention is on Mr. Restrepo's comments. One of the challenges that we face is the challenge of implementation. And this all boils up to one thing: access to financing. Yeah. And I have been part of a negotiation that took 6 years for us to have access to one financing project. We just signed it this week with the presence of President Lula, just to sign out how important it was for us. And it's not always that you have the possibility of having a whole team of people that are dedicated through 6-year cycles to negotiate access to financing. So what maybe would be helpful is to have more MDBs, more multilateral development banks, participating in efforts within the FAO so that we, one, try and simplify processes, and two, try to enhance capacity building of teams that build projects, because you said there is not enough bankable projects. I would dare say that there are bankable projects, but the cycle of negotiation is too heavy on human resources. And if you're talking about local governments, the local governments, they have their own cycle, their own political cycle that is not always the same cycle of federal governments. So you get confusing cycles, and in the end, you don't have continuity in negotiations. So it should aim at simplifying access to financing and towards capacity building. And as for COP28, I was taking notes on what Mrs. Imelda was saying, and she was talking about ambitions of the presidency and slowness of negotiation. And this is a dilemma that we have been witnessing. I have been in the field for 30 years now, and what we're seeing now is this shift in trying to be more fast and faster in negotiations. But still, we have to balance that with the possibility of having legitimacy in declarations. And sometimes we try to be quick and we try to be fast, and we leave legitimacy behind. So I do understand that there is some frustration in negotiations processes, but they usually have a reason, and we have to take that into account in negotiation processes. So if I may, I have been witnessing this tokenization of things. So everything is getting towards this format where we have TED Talkers, but we're not TED Talkers, we're negotiators. So we should balance those two ways of acting. Thank you.
No, thank you, Ambassador Gala. Two important points. Of course, Dada was a negotiator herself and has had the sleepless nights that go with that in the UNFSS process. But sometimes they lead to, I think, good success. Coronavia, the Sharm el Sheikh. These are all steps in the right direction. I think your other point on finance, if I could just touch on it, because it is important, and it's not just that tiny bits are going to the small holder farmers. It's that not enough finance is going to agriculture and food systems. Certainly not enough climate finance. I mean, Marcial is doing a study on that right now. It's in decline when you look at climate tagged development finance. It's in free fall, right? It just gets lower and lower and lower. I won't give you the numbers because we're going to release the report at COP, but it's less than 20%. So on the one hand, we have solutions, right? And you've mentioned them, solutions which have multiple benefits. On the other hand, the amount of money, certainly climate funding, is declining towards those very solutions that could make a difference on building resilience, on helping countries and farmers adapt, on, of course, the mitigation gains, the reductions in greenhouse gases. So I think that's one of the dilemmas that I hope we can resolve, or at least move forward at COP28, and that's very much part of the FAST initiative that was launched at the last COP, and we'll move forward. We have a few more minutes. There was a hand. Yes, please, go ahead. We actually don't, but...
My name is Jessica Landman. I'm with the Environmental Defense Fund and the Coalition for Blue Foods, the Secretariat for that coalition. And I first wanted to thank the COP presidency for addressing this issue in the Emirates Declaration. My question has to do with the discussion of biodiversity loss, not really touching at all today's discussion on aquatic foods and their role in the agriculture discussion. Aquatic foods being actually very climate friendly, relatively speaking. I'm curious, for example, whether in the Brazilian multi-sectoral ministerial group that you mentioned, Mrs. Carneiro, whether the new fisheries ministry is at the table, because that's an opportunity to address the issue of biodiversity loss through agri-foods and fishery. And I often have found in the discussions at the CFS that the role of fisheries and aquatic foods generally has not had the visibility that it might, given the importance of aquatic foods in addressing both nutrition and climate change. Especially because from the standpoint of nutrition, many of the nutritional challenges that we face could be well addressed through improving upon our use of fisheries and especially sustainable aquaculture to fill those gaps. Thank you.
I think that was to you. So I'm getting messages that we're going to be thrown out the room soon, but I think it is an important question. So maybe a TED Talk kind of answer to begin, and then we take it bilateral as well if needed. But please, Ambassador Carla.
Yeah, so thank you so very much for that question. It's a very important one. Concerning our multi-sector ministerial program of work on sustainable bioeconomy, yes, we do have fisheries included, and nutrition is being taken into account. We do think it's still a challenge, but we are working towards it, and we recognize the importance of that source of food and of being taken care of in a sustainable way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And Dada, you have the last word as COP incoming presidency.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that Blue Foods is going to be given space at the presidency during Food and Water Day. There is going to be a sharing of initiatives being undertaken, and also question on whether the Emirati declaration is available. We are dealing first at the state actor level, so it's sent to each permanent missions and also to the governments for now. And afterwards, we will share it publicly.
Okay, so it's a matter of minutes for it to be leaked.
If not already.
If not already. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, thank you so much for joining early in the morning, late in the week. This really very insightful event, looking at how we join the dots, the food, biodiversity, and climate agendas. And thank you. If I could just, before we finish, ask for a big round of applause for the wonderful speakers who have really brought their insights. Thank you so much. We wish you all a very nice day.